Continue that conversation right now as we're joined here in studio by RNC Chair McDaniel. Thank you so much for being with us.
Great to be here. Great to be in the Hoosier State. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, appreciate you being here. We're going to talk about why you're here in town in just a moment. But first on COVID-19, you heard Indiana's senators there. It seems as if there is a much louder call this week from people, especially in your party, about vaccinations. Do you join your fellow Republicans in that message, and will it work in terms of getting more people vaccinated? A CBS poll this week showing just 29% of Republicans, 29% say they have no plans to get vaccinated at all.
Well, I certainly was vaccinated. My husband, my 2 teenage children have been vaccinated. I feel like it was safe. I encourage people to do it. I also think President Trump did a phenomenal job putting us in this place where we have vaccines at a record pace. I think Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, with some of the doubt they cast on the vaccine when President Trump was in office, has hurt. And I think they have work to do to go educate voters and really get out and talk to them, or Americans, about the importance of the vaccine.
Going back to the campaign there, you did write an op-ed for the Washington Examiner last month saying former President Trump and the GOP deserve credit for the coronavirus vaccine. Why haven't Republicans done more to take credit for that rollout? And would it have a big impact on the hesitancy that's out there if former President Trump had more to say publicly about getting the vaccine himself and encouraging more people to get their shots, as other Republicans have done more forcefully this week?
There was nobody more vocal about the vaccine than President Trump. And Democrats continued to sow doubt about it because he was in office. And I think it would have been helpful if President Biden had come in and said, I want to thank President Trump. This is a bipartisan effort. We need to work together. And you really haven't seen that.
But should former President Trump have more to say about it now?
Oh, I can't imagine him doing any more than he's done. I mean, he got us here. He said the vaccines would be safe. He said we'd be vaccinating 1 million. He's been very encouraging, as has all Republicans. But again, Biden's the one in the reins right now. He owns this. He set a benchmark of 70%. He hasn't reached it. This is his administration, and they need to get this done.
Let's talk about why you're here in Indianapolis this weekend. The Young Republicans holding a convention here in town. You're also taking part in the Indiana GOP's Diversity Series. How important are these efforts to grow the party, make it younger, more diverse? And ahead of 22 and 24, will that effort also need to include any changes to the party's policy platforms or policy proposals as well?
So in 2020, we had huge growth in Hispanic, African-American, and Asian voters turning out for the Republican Party. And that's just going to continue as we have series like the one in Indiana, this Indiana Diversity Series, that we have 15 graduates that we're honoring today. It's just an amazing accomplishment. And part of it is, as we're going forward, talking about not only how you can have a better voice in being part of both parties, but also how we can be a better party by listening to these communities and learning from them as we have sustained efforts long term.
Let's also talk about one of this week's other big stories when you talk about next generation of elected officials. Certainly one rising star in the party here in Indiana on the national scene has been Indiana Congressman Jim Banks.
Yep.
He was in the headlines this past week, named by Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy to head up the Republican slate on that January 6th committee. Then Speaker Pelosi said she would block both Jim Banks and Jim Jordan from that committee. We're going to hear from Congressman Banks coming up. In the meantime, the executive director for the Indiana Democrats said this about Banks. She said Banks was as responsible for the domestic terror attack on the U.S. Capitol as other Republican Party leaders, in her words, saying he, quote, encouraged insurrectionists to show up at the U.S. Capitol hours before one of the country's darkest days. What's your response to that and to the events of this past week?
Well, I think everybody's condemned the violent attacks on the Capitol that day. I don't think anybody has said that the perpetrators shouldn't be pursued and have to, be held to account for attacking the Capitol. But for Nancy Pelosi to abuse power and not allow Republicans to have a voice on that committee is unprecedented.
Ms. Cheney is still on the committee.
The one she chose. Not allowing Minority Leader McCarthy to have the ability to have say as to who's on that committee, because there are real questions. Why wasn't there more security? What did Nancy Pelosi have to do with those types of calls for enhanced security, knowing that there were going to be that many people in D.C.? So having a bipartisan committee is what gives it validity. And guess what? Half the country deserves to have representation. And she just said, sorry, no, I'm in full control here, which is why she needs to be removed as Speaker.
Is there really any way to do a congressional investigation in a way that both parties will support in Washington these days?
Well, a first start would be to let the Minority leader pick who serves on the committee from the Republican Party, which she isn't letting him do. This is unprecedented. I've never seen this before. For her to ultimately reject Kevin McCarthy's picks for that committee shows that she has no interest in working with Republicans. And boy, do we have a lot to get done. Our border's in crisis. We have inflation. We have crime skyrocketing around this country. And it shows that Nancy Pelosi has no interest in serving the American people and working with Republicans on anything.
A lot of issues I know you'll be talking about ahead of the midterms. We got to leave it there. Ronna McDaniel, thank you so much
Thank you.
For being with us, and we hope you have a nice weekend here in Indianapolis.
Appreciate it. Love it here.